a few weeks, and they finally came to that decision on Saturday. I was thrilled, but he is in a wheelchair, and he can't get in and out of the wheelchair. He needs help, and it was the kind of thing where I brought Adam with me, because when you look at Adam, you feel a little bit more secure as far as, I was thinking, I could carry this guy, but brought Adam with me, and I'm so thankful. Seth was out of town, so I couldn't. I wish I could have brought both of them, because we ended up having to go down to the beach because of some other arrangements, and it was down through the neighborhood to the beach, and the wheelchair couldn't go all the way, and this is where I don't mean to sound disrespectful or anything, but sometimes it's a whole lot easier to carry just metal, just carry weights, than it is somebody who can't help you. You know what I mean? Couldn't bend and things like that. And so, it's no problem for my boys to carry a lot of weight. But after about a quarter mile, then a half mile, and you're still carrying, and it's sand, and it's like, I think we're going to make it. Yeah. But it was totally worthwhile. Getting out there in the water, though, I was teaching a class last Tuesday over at our sister church, and we were talking about baptism, and it just happened to get brought up, and I was very thankful to have the opportunity, because I'm so glad somebody, I'm guessing this somebody, but somebody told me years ago, when you do baptize somebody in the ocean or in a river, and here it's most likely going to be an ocean, most people don't stop and think about some of these little details. Go deep, because if you don't go deep, you're making your job really, really hard. If the lower the water level, the harder it is to get somebody, not just to get somebody under, but to get them back up. You need the water to work in your favor. But the other really big thing is in a river or in the ocean, you baptize into the wave. You go into the water, because if the river's moving and you don't baptize into the current, you'll lose the person. You baptize them, and there goes the current. There goes the person that you're trying to baptize. So it's really important. And I know all that. I was just talking about it last Tuesday. But here we are just trying to survive the walk. And so we're walking out into the waves, and we're doing the old, I don't know what you call it, but we made a chair with our hands. And so we're walking out there. And as we're walking out there, I'm thinking to myself, we probably should be walking backwards, and about that time, this wave would just bam! And if it weren't for Adam, I would have been gone, and the guy who's baptized would have been gone. But we kind of came to, and it just went on out. Anyway, those are all the unimportant parts. The important part is we have new brother and sister in Christ. So, yeah.
Just for future reference, Cape Canaveral has put in several wheelchair things on the beach that you can go around.
That's great.
2 or 3 of them.
That's great.
Cape Canaveral at that port, they got all sorts of money.
Yeah, we were able to go quite a ways with the wheelchair, but the walking and especially when you actually get in the water, you've got to walk quite a ways, because I'm telling you, even just waist deep is not deep enough. You need to get out there a little bit deeper. And I'm not a beach person. You can probably tell by looking at me. I'm not a beach person. But all the waves were like this until about every 3 or 4 minutes, and then bam, you get hit with a big one. I'm like, where did that come from? Yeah. So, okay, enough of my rambling. We're going to pray here, unless anybody else has a announcement for the good of the whole or anything to bring us up to date on. I'm not seeing it. Let's pray. Gracious Heavenly Father, you are gracious God, you are our Father, we're part of your family, and we just want to express our thanks again. Tonight, as we gather as your men, we want to be the kind of men you want us to be, and we know that a large part of that is going to be when we're shaped by your word, when we hold each other accountable, like iron sharpens iron, when we help each other. And I pray even tonight with different insights, and as we look at your word together, that very thing might happen so that we might grow in a relationship with you. God, for the baptisms, I say thank you. For the George and Lou, something that didn't turn out serious, I say thank you. For Greg and his whole family, I just ask for that comfort and the peace that passes understanding that you talk about in your word. we know that all things work together for good, and that even a time like this, you can bring blessing, and that's what we're asking for Grace Family. Be with us and help us as we study your word tonight. I ask in Jesus' name. All right, we are ready for the Gospel of John, 12th chapter. Is that correct? Is that where everybody else is marked? Yep. Okay, there you go. You're in trouble. Yeah.
I'm actually here for you.
Oh, okay. You're in trouble. I'm in trouble. Okay, yeah.
Thank you.
I'll ask him to do that.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
The women's group that meets, they don't have air conditioning, so that's why it was a emergency. We just cranked our air conditioning down. All right, Gospel of John, the 12th chapter. We only made it into the first couple of verses, so let's reread those just to refresh our memory. Jesus, therefore, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. So they made him a supper there, and Martha was serving, but Lazarus was one of those reclining at the table. And I think I remember explaining the whole reclining thing, because that's going to be significant with what Mary is going to do. Verse 3, Mary then took a pound of very costly perfume of pure nard and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. Frequently in Bible times, first century, and even in Old Testament times, one of the ways, they did have kind of a banking system. Do you know where their banking system was located? Have we talked about this before? Yeah, temples, especially in the pagan world. If you wanted to keep your money in a place, it kind of operated like a bank today. The temples would do that. But typically, if you wanted to acquire wealth and invest in something, you could set aside money if it were like gold and coins and things like that. But often people would invest in things like this. You get some expensive perfume, and it wasn't just to have an expensive perfume. That's something that would be your retirement. And the very fact that we're going to find out that this is worth a year's wages, this would be something that, I say that because it would not be uncommon for somebody to purchase something like this and never use it as perfume. You know what I mean? You'd buy something like this because it's something that often held its value. The other thing that I find kind of fascinating that is kind of interesting at times is that in this period of history, and from what I understand, a long time after the first century, you'd also invest in clothing. Yeah. And one of the reasons, and again, this is just the best of my understanding, I've only read a little about this, but I find this really interesting because fashions didn't change the way they change today, right? And so it's not like, you invest and spend a lot of money on some clothes, and 5 years later, nobody's wearing the tie that's this fat. They're all wearing the skinny tie again. So it's not one of those kind of things. So clothing was often part of an inheritance. If it was fine clothing, it was well made, it'd be the kind of stuff that would be handed down. And so you can invest in clothing. Well, I find that so interesting because didn't Jesus make a comment about where moths destroy your clothing? Well, he wasn't just talking about there goes your wardrobe. He was talking about one of the things that people would really invest in. It's kind of like your IRA. The moths just ate your, right? One of those kind of things. And I guess the other reason I find this fascinating is the way in biblical times you showed distress, tore your clothes. And to us, we think, oh, okay, yeah, you're distressed. But that was a big thing. It wasn't like the typical person would have a large wardrobe. They would not. And it would typically be something very expensive. And it would not be uncommon for your clothing to have been handed down in your family. because you just didn't need a lot, and it was made of such a quality, but it was something that represented value. Well, that was the case with things like perfume. And so she pours this out on Jesus. Again, I'll digress just a little bit, but not much. In 2 Samuel, the 23rd chapter, there's a story. And ever since I heard a sermon years ago on this, I've never forgotten the parallel here. It was Dr. Roger Chambers preached a sermon, and he preached a sermon on this passage, but he also told the story of 2 Samuel 23. 2 Samuel 23, King David has some men who are called the mighty men. Always loved the mighty men. The mighty men, as Dr. Chambers explained this, he said it was a designation not just given to warriors. These guys would often be like in a generation and a time where the average height was, 5'6" to 5'10", something like that. These would be your 6'6" guys, just kind of stand out in the crowd. And everybody else, 175 pounds. These would be the 6'6", 250 to 300 pounds. They were just huge men. So they had this physical appearance often. And if you read at the end of 2 Samuel, when it talks about these mighty men, it talks about 3 of these guys who are like above and beyond everybody else. And it talked about the exploits, the accomplishments of some of these mighty men. But the refrain was they would talk about one of the guys went in and killed a lion, or somebody else fought off 100 Philistines. But after they tell the story, they say, but they did not attain to the 3. This guy did some great, heroic things, but he did not attain to the 3. The three, these were the guys who, one of his exploits was knocking down 800 men by himself. So 800 to 1, and he won, right? One of the stories I love is where one of the 3 came to a pea patch, but it was on Israelite property. So it's this part of the territory of Israel. So he took his stand. It's kind of like, we're in Israel territory now. I'm not retreating anymore. And he fought off all the Philistines. So none of the Philistines could go any further because here I stand. And anyway, the 3 were just some valiant warriors, right? 2 Samuel chapter 23, you've got the 3 greatest mighty men of David. Over here, David. And David is talking about the fact that the Philistines have taken a territory, and part of the territory included Bethlehem, where David grew up. And David is musing out loud, oh, if I could just taste the water of the well at Bethlehem. No water tastes as good as where you grew up, right? So overhearing that, the 3 get together, and they decide they're going to get David a drink from the well of Bethlehem. And so they break through the military defenses of the Philistines, fight them off. I can just picture 2 of them fighting them off while the 3rd one lowers the rope and draws the water and brings it back to David. When he brings it back to David, you remember the rest of the story? And David finds out what they have done and how they brought the water to him. What does David do with the water? He takes it and he dumps it out on the ground. I'm guessing a lot of modern people would not understand that at all. Like, well, thanks a lot. We just risked our lives, and here you dump it out of the ground. But ancient people would really get this, because there are several ways you make sacrifices, offer sacrifices. You burn animal sacrifices. There are wave offerings with grain, but liquid offerings you would take and you pour them out on the ground. And one of the reasons behind this is when you pour the liquid on the ground, guess what? Nobody's drinking that. It's gone. It's in the earth. Well, that means it's been sacrificed, right? So you didn't just say, cheers, God, and drink it yourself. You gave it up. And that's exactly what David is doing. He's saying, this is so precious. These men risked their lives so I could have this. It's too precious for me to drink. So he offers it to God. Okay, the sermon, which has really got to me, maybe it was just a time in my life, I don't know. But the sermon, his point was, he said, most modern Americans would say, wow, this is such a wonderful thing that somebody's done. I'm going to give some of it to God. And we pour a little bit out on the ground and we drink the rest. And he said, he just made the point. Notice the parallels between what Mary does and what happened with David. And the point he made was this. You know, if you don't believe in God, then don't offer a thing. Keep it all to yourself. If you do believe in God, then give it all. That makes sense. It's the halfway in between stuff that really doesn't make sense. But why are you just being a little committed and holding a little bit? If God's really God, then just give it up. And that just really made an impression on me. And I think that's exactly what Mary's doing here, right? She doesn't, and again, to carry out the parallel, she doesn't break or carefully take off a little bit of jar, pour a little bit out, and then put the rest away, save the rest of her investment. No, she dumps the whole thing out so that everybody can smell the perfume. It's a total act of worship. Verse 4, but Judas Iscariot, one of the disciples who was intending to betray him, said, why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii? 300 denarii, what's a denarii? It's excuse me?
Greek money.
It is Greek money. It is equivalent to about a day's wage, right? So this is where we get it's worth about a year's worth of work, 300 days of work, right? And given to poor people. Why isn't that happen? Why don't we do that? Now that sounds pious, doesn't it? Yeah. Boy, we could have done a lot of good with this. And Jesus' response was, well, we don't get to Jesus' response yet. First of all, John gives us a editorial comment. Verse 6, now he said this not because he was concerned about the poor, but because he was a thief. And as he had the money box, he used to pilfer what was put into it. A lot of lessons here, I think. What comes out of somebody's mouth is not always the case. You know, that's not, a lot of times that's not what people are really concerned about. I can't remember who it was, but I was just having a conversation with somebody last week, and we were talking about this very principle, that sometimes, especially when people are upset, sometimes they, I don't know, that thing just really bothers me. It's like, no, it doesn't. That's what you're pointing at. In fact, I'll just go ahead and tell you, the one that comes to my mind is there was, because they're no longer with us anymore, but years ago, there was a couple that were snowbirds, and they came down here half the year and went back up to Illinois the other half the year. And I found out in visiting with them one time when they were down here that they were looking for a new church back up in Illinois. And I was asking, well, what's wrong? They said, oh, our church up there, we just can't stand it anymore. And I'm like, what's the matter? They got rid of the organ. There were some other things, but that was the main thing. They got rid of the organ. And, you know, how disrespectful to some of us older people that really appreciated the organ and stuff like that. So we just can't go to that church. And we were talking a little bit more, and I kid you not, they were saying, but boy, we love Merritt Island Church. Just love Merritt Island. I'm going to tell you the truth. That very year, we got rid of the organ here at this church. The year before. Do you understand what I'm saying? They said that's why they left the church up there, but that was the same conversation. They love our church, but we got rid of the organ. Do you understand what I'm saying? Sometimes it's not what comes out of your mouth. And my guess is a lot of times it's because people feel disrespected. Maybe it's more of a, you know what, you didn't care about me. It's not so much that, it's what that represented. You know, well, anyway, in a negative light, that's, I think, part of the lesson here. Judas sounds pious when he says this, doesn't he? It's like, wait, man, we could have done a lot of good things with this. That's not where his heart was. And John gives us that insight. So verse 7, therefore Jesus said, let her alone so that she may keep it for the day of my burial. For you always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me. Okay, so what's Jesus' response to this? By the way, did Jesus know why Judas said what he said? Yeah, he knew what's really going on. I think that plays into understanding how he responds here. But how does he put this in your own words? How does How does Jesus respond to this idea that, hey, we could have taken this money and used it for a lot of good? Yeah.
Well, sounds like worshiping God was more important than what they were doing with this, taking this money.
Okay, I agree with you. I think this places a high value on acts of worship. Because I mean, seriously, if you're just going to use a calculator to figure out what can be accomplished here on a physical level, we just dumped an entire year's wages out on the ground, on his feet. David dumped it out on the ground, that sacrifice that was given to him. So if you measure it from that physical level, I think there's a big lesson here that worship is very important to God. It shows where our value system is. Do you see anything else in Jesus' response here? How about when he says, you always have the poor, you always have with you? Yes, and this is where I think it's important to realize Jesus knew exactly why he was saying what he was saying. And if he's going to put on a front and say, wow, we should have taken care of the poor, Jesus is in essence saying, well, wait a minute, Judas. You got poor around you every day. What are you doing? He's calling his bluff, isn't he?
Why hadn't you already done?
Yes. You may not have been able to do it to this degree, but why aren't you doing it already? So I want to point that out because Jesus is not saying, oh, we'll never take care of poor people, so don't try. Why do we know he's not saying that?
That's all he helped.
Say what?
That's all the people he helped.
Yeah, help the poor and told us to help the
People he
poor.
helped were all poor.
Yeah, what did he tell the rich young ruler?
Yeah, give it all up.
To give it to the poor. Yeah, there are many times where he tells us to give to the poor. So we know he's not saying that's not important. Yeah, if we can help poor people, that's great. What I really think is taking place here is putting the spotlight on worship. God's got to be most important, and calling his bluff. Don't just try to sound good here. If you really want to take care of poor people, there are ample opportunities to do that. Okay, verse 9. A large crowd of the Jews learned that he was there, and they came not for Jesus' sake only, but that they might see Lazarus, whom he raised from the dead. Okay, there are a couple things that I find interesting here. Who is this that's coming to see all this? The Jews. And when John signifies this, the Jews, what does that usually give us insight into?
Like the leadership, the Pharisees and so forth, religious.
Yeah, okay. You do have the high council, and you have the Pharisees and stuff like that.
Okay, or the people who are against it.
Yes.
What you're getting at,
Usually, and not always, and this is one of the places where we're like, but usually if he's just going to talk generic, open-minded, we'll talk about the crowds. But if we're going to talk about people who are more antagonistically bent, looking to test Jesus, usually uses this phrase, the Jews. Well, I find that interesting because throughout this passage, we're going to find some other places where the Jews come to believe. And the Jews are convinced. Okay. They come. They don't just want to see Jesus, as they often do. They want to see Lazarus. Why do they want to see Lazarus?
Pretty big thing.
And Exhibit A. Here's some proof. Verse 10. But the chief priests planned to put Lazarus to death also. The chief priests had planned to put him to death. Okay. I'm just going to speculate here for just a minute. But when Jesus came to Jerusalem before, like back in chapter 7 and 8, when Jesus is in Jerusalem for, it'd be the Feast of Tabernacles in chapter 7. When he's in town, are the crowd aware of the fact that the religious leaders want to kill Jesus?
Yeah.
Yeah, remember what I'm saying? Isn't this the guy that they want to kill? Okay, just a little bit of speculation here. Maybe in verse 9, one of the reasons they want to see Lazarus is because they know they want to kill Lazarus too. I mean, not just the fact that he's been raised to death, but he's another guy that's got a target on his back, so to speak. Anyway, verse 11, because on account of, why do they want to put him to death? Because on account of him, many of the Jews were going away and were believing in Jesus. Who was going away and believing in Jesus? Okay, again, I don't want to read too much into this, but he doesn't say the crowd. He said that before, but here he says the Jews. So maybe the religious leaders are extra upset because the people who weren't swayed before, in fact, were more anti-Jesus, even those guys are coming over and believing in Jesus because you know what? You can't ignore the fact this guy was in the tomb for 4 days. Okay, can I just carry this out a little bit further? So what's the strategy of the religious leaders? Let's kill him. And once we kill him, that'll prove that he was never dead, never rose again. You understand what I'm saying? Yeah, maybe it's not in people's face. You can't undo what Jesus did. You could tell, oh, that was a lie, but haven't there been other people? Were there people there to witness this? Have other people seen Lazarus? Yes. Right here, that's part of what's going on. That's why they're so upset.
The festival covers, there's probably going to be a couple 100,000 people there.
Oh, yeah.
So they
Wow.
all see that, hey, this is the guy who raised from the dead.
Yes.
So if they kill him before that, they can say, well, there's the guy who raised from the dead, he's dead.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Maybe they're thinking instead of just a little problem, it's going to be a much bigger problem. The more people, could be. Thank you, guys. That's good. Good. Okay, verse 12. On the next day, the large crowd who had come to the feast. Okay, large crowd had come to the feast. These are the people, just like you mentioned, the population of the city would swell several times its normal size during these major feasts. And this is the Passover feast. This is the biggest one. So this is probably talking about the people who've come from the area of Galilee, and they've made it down there to the feast. Out-of-towners. When they had come to the feast, and they heard that, when they had heard that Jesus was coming to Jerusalem, took branches of the palm trees and went out to meet him and began to shout, Hosanna. Okay, these are the, by the way, I find this interesting, because who's getting the ball rolling here? The out-of-town group. Okay, the out-of-town group. They're taking these palm branches out and they're saying, Hosanna. Do you have a footnote there? What does Hosanna mean? Save now. Save now. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, even the King of Israel. Okay, I don't want to take anything away from this because I think it is very much an act of worship, an act of praise. By the way, what's the significance of putting the palm branches down?
I was thinking that it had something to do with, it's like rolling out the red carpet.
Yes, it is. And who would they do that for typically?
Well, usually the king.
Yeah, a king, a ruler, or a conquering king after a great victory when he comes back from victory. The interesting thing, though, is in most cultures, the conquering king would come back on a white horse.
Right.
By the way, Jesus does in the book of Revelation, right?
Yeah.
White horse, right? But here, what is he going to ride? I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Well, let's just go ahead and read it. They say this, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. The reason I wanted to comment, though, let me plant this seed. When they say save now, I find that very significant. Yes, they're praising him. Yes, they're treating him like king. But it's as though they're saying, take care of Rome right away. Remember in chapter 6 when they all wanted to make him king? And what did Jesus do with all those people who wanted to make him king? Kept saying more and more difficult things until they all left. You remember this? You got to eat my flesh and drink my blood. And they didn't understand. They left, and that's when he turns to his disciples and said, are you going to leave me too? And they at least understood that even though they didn't understand everything he said, they knew he was the only one who has words of life. They know he's from God. So I always interpret that, okay, we don't get everything, but we know you're the one. So no, we're not going to leave. Anyway, I really see that mixed in here with this idea. I don't think that they got a complete understanding of who Jesus is. But the news of the miracles, wow. This is the one we want to sit on the throne. Psalm 118. Psalm 118 is one of the psalms that they refer to as the Psalm of Ascent. To ascend. It's one of the psalms they typically would travel in large groups. And as you come up to Jerusalem, as you're ascending, part of the procession would be to sing or chant or recite some of the psalms. In Psalm 118, this comes from Psalm 118. This is one of the things that they would sing on the ascent, but probably with extra emphasis, because it's not just we're quoting a psalm. It's kind of like, let's quote the Bible, and this is the guy. Here he is. Okay, let me just go ahead and get this off my chest. Psalm 118 is also the same psalm. Psalm of Ascent is talking about Jesus. It's the same psalm that says, this is the day that the Lord has made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. Here's what I want to get off my chest. It used to always bother me when there was a song, famous song. This is the day the Lord has made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. And people used to sing it and say, isn't this a great day? Let's sing this song. This is the day the Lord has made. And I'm thinking, yeah, there's a sense in which every day is better because of Jesus. But if you understood the psalm, they're not talking about today. They're not talking about every day. They're talking about the day that the Messiah comes into the world. That's the day that they're talking about in this psalm. Okay, I got that off my chest. Let's go back to this. Let's go back to this. So here's what they're saying. It says in verse 14, Jesus finding a young donkey sat on it, as it is written, fear not, daughter of Zion. This is, by the way, daughter of Zion. Who does that refer to? Yeah, specifically Jerusalem. Why do they call Jerusalem daughter of Zion? Yes, one of the dominant mountains, the mountain on which the temple is built. Right? So you ascend, and that's the dominant mountain there, the mountain of Zion, which, by the way, became figuratively used to describe heaven. So when we talk about going to Zion, it's not just Jerusalem, we're talking about heaven. Anyway, fear not, daughter of Zion, behold, your king is coming. This is a quote from Zechariah chapter 9, verse 9. Seated on a donkey's colt. Okay, the other Gospels give us more detail on Jesus telling his disciples how to get the colt for him to ride on. Notice this is an editorial comment, verse 16. These things his disciples did not understand at first, but when Jesus was glorified, then they remembered these things were written of him, that they had done these things to him. So John, by the way, John's writing this gospel later than all the other gospel writers, right? So he's writing this much later, and he's admitting to the fact, as John's the one who lasts longer than anybody else. Right? And he's admitting to the fact, by the way, we didn't get it. We didn't get it. I got to tell you, I appreciate the honesty, the humility, but I also love little details like this, because this is the kind of thing when people say that the New Testament, what Jesus did, that's not what really happened. It's one of the attacks on Christianity. They say that years later, after Constantine, especially around the time of Constantine, the church at that time wanted to make this good moral teacher into something more than he ever was before. And so they made up a lot of these documents associated with the New Testament. There's so many flaws with that, by the way. And every year that we find more documents that go back even to the first century, it disproves that theory, right? But the reason why we have to deal with that theory today is years ago there was this movie called The Da Vinci Code, or this book. I guess they did make it into a movie. It was all based on this idea that the church made up this story. Well, even before we had some of the really earliest manuscripts that disprove that, look at this. If the church were making up a story, who would all the heroes be? Wouldn't it be the church leaders? Wouldn't you make up a story that made you look really good? And look at what this story says about the disciples, the apostles, the ones that were used as the foundation of the church. It pretty much says, oh yeah, we were clueless. We didn't know what's going on. In other words, it's inconsistent with this theory that some people have. And by the way, the factual information that we can lay our hands on disprove it too when we find these older manuscripts. Verse 17. So the people who were with him when he called Lazarus out of the tomb. So here are the other eyewitnesses, right? As well as Lazarus himself, by the way. But the people who were with him when he called Lazarus out of the tomb and raised him from the dead continued to testify about him. Okay, this is Passover time, and the news is spreading. They're telling more and more people. For this reason also the people went and met him because they heard that he had performed this sign. Probably for a lot of other reasons as well, but this one, wow. Everyone wants to see Jesus. So the Pharisees said to one another, you see that you are not doing any good work. Look, the world has gone after him. So they're extremely frustrated. This kind of reminds us what Caiaphas said at the end of the last chapter when he said, don't you understand it's better that we kill this one guy and save the nation? Well, they're kind of reiterating that. Verse 20, now there were some Greeks among them. Greeks, especially in a context like this, we're probably not talking about Hellenized Jews. I shouldn't say that. But what is a Hellenized Jew?
The Jews were they Jews that had been in Greece?
Yes, under Greek influence in other parts of the world. And sometimes that's one of the ways you designate a distinction between the Jews who were in the area of Judea, and especially in Jerusalem, versus Jews who lived outside of Palestine and even outside of Galilee. Sometimes you designate different ways. But when he refers to the Greeks here, we're probably not talking about Jews from other parts of the world. We're probably talking about people who aren't Jews. Okay, people who aren't Jews, many times they would call them seekers, and they would come to the synagogue because they wanted to find out more about this God of the Jews, and they could convert, they could proselyte, they could become a Jew. You could become a Jew. And part of that was circumcision, but you also had to be immersed. You had to be baptized to become a Jew. Anyway, this is probably referring to Gentile seekers, people who are interested. And when they hear about Jesus, they want to know about Jesus too. Now, there were some Greeks among those who were going up to worship at the feast, and these men came to Philip. Who's Philip?
He's one of the 12, isn't he?
Okay, Philip, who was from Bethsaida of Galilee. Philip, by the way, is a Greek name. Greek name. Do you know any significant Greek people with the name Philip? It's in Greek history, especially back around the time of Alexander. There were some great leaders in the Greek Empire who went by the name of Philip. So very significant. And so he's got a Greek name. I find it kind of interesting. The Greeks go to somebody that maybe they could relate to. They go to Philip, who's from Galilee, and began to ask him, saying, "Sir, we wish to see Jesus." Okay, they want to see Jesus too. Have we met anybody before who wasn't a Jew who wanted to see Jesus? Yes. Who did we meet? By the way, John doesn't go into this detail. We have to go to the other Gospels. But who do we meet?
Was this a centurion, or was it a
Okay,
leader? I remember
there
was a
is a
servant.
possibility that back in chapter 4, after we have the woman at the well, we've got a Samaritan, and then we've got this royal official. And some people think that royal official, in all likelihood, represented a Gentile. Could be. That's going out on a little bit of a limb there. That would be a way to designate Gentile, but it's not specifically stated. But wasn't there a woman a Syrophoenician woman, that Syrophoenicia, being the area, Tyre, Sidon, the Phoenician coast, north. I keep going like this because on the map, you've got Palestine down here, and north would be the Syrophoenician coastline off of Mediterranean Sea. It was a Syrophoenician woman, and she came begging on behalf of her child. And what did Jesus say to her?
It's not right to give the right on the table to the
Yeah.
dogs.
Yeah.
Oh, the dog.
My ministry is focused on the Jews, right? And it's not right to give the food that says they for children, give it to the dogs. And her response was,
Yes, it is.
even the dogs get scraps off the table. I love that because it shows like she wasn't offended. In humility, I'll take whatever you've got. And did Jesus respond?
Yeah.
Yes, he did. Yes, he did. And he commended her for her faith, too. He was simply saying, there's a strategy. It's laid out in Acts, the first chapter. The work was supposed to start, first of all, in Jerusalem, then Judea, then Samaria, like ripples on the pond. God had a plan. We're going to focus here. Jesus had a plan. He started with just 12 guys, focused on these 12 men. And 11 of them, somebody replaced Judas. Who replaced Judas?
Matthias.
Yes, Matthias replaced Judas. And he worked with them for 3.5 years. That's where his focus was. And then it grew from there. Well, I bring that up because these men, these Greeks who are asking to see Jesus, it's interesting because it seems like a bit of a put-off. Well, that's very similar to what happened with the Syrophoenician woman. Verse 22, Philip came and told Andrew. Andrew and Philip, who's Andrew, by the way? Who's his brother?
Andrew, isn't that Peter's?
Peter's brother. Peter's brother. I find this interesting because both Andrew and Philip are Greek names. Anyway, Philip goes and he gets Andrew, and Andrew and Philip, by the way, Philip and Andrew are Jews. They are Jews, but they have Greek names. Okay, just to clarify that. Anyway, they both came and told Jesus, and Jesus answered them. I want to emphasize that because on one level, this doesn't sound like an answer. Okay, they're requesting because the Greeks want to get closer and want to have a meeting with Jesus. Jesus answered and said to them, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Okay, what does it mean to be glorified? If you're in all your glory, where are you? At the top, the best you can possibly be. What did Jesus come to do? What's the culmination of his ministry?
The cross.
The cross. So one of the ways he's going to refer to the cross is being glorified, because that's exactly what I came to do, right? So he says, he answered them, he's answering them about the request on behalf of the Greeks, said, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. By the way, it's going to happen in a week, down to the last week. The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Truly, truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. In other words, he's saying you got to plant that seed in the ground, and just like a burial, but that seed produces life, and then finally you get the grain. He's making the parallel that to be glorified, Jesus is going to die. He's going to die. And he's using this analogy, this illustration of planting the seed in the ground. Verse 25, he who loves his life loses it. He who hates his life in this world will keep it to eternal life. Okay, who do you think he was talking about back in verse 24? This illustration, unless grain wheat falls to the earth and dies.
He's talking about himself.
Probably talking about himself. Why do we think that? Because verse 23. Verse 23, he's talking about, I'm going to do the hour is coming, I'm going to the cross. He goes from that to talking about death. Automatically, I'm thinking, well, he's talking about himself. But who's he talking about in verse 25? Isn't he talking? Maybe this will become a little clearer in a minute. Isn't he talking about those who would follow him? He's not just saying, listen, I'm going to die. He's also alluding to the fact that if you want to follow me, you got to die. Okay? Did he ever say that? Yeah. He says, if you want to be my follower, what do you have to take up? Why did somebody carry a cross in the first century?
Yeah.
Can you think of any examples of somebody carrying a cross in the first century? The cross that you crucified on. Yeah, when he said to take up your cross and put yourself to death. Parallel would be if we told somebody, sit in your electric chair. What do we mean by that? You put yourself to death, right? Okay, look at this verse though, verse 25. I love this. Do you have any footnotes here by the word life? In the Greek it says, whoever loves his psyche, the word from which we get psychology. And it's also a word that's best translated soul. Your soul. That which goes on after your body dies. It's the core of your being. He says whoever loves his soul loses it. Whoever hates his soul, psyche, in this world will keep it to Zoe, to life eternal. Do you remember the difference between biology, bios, and Zoe? Bios means you're a living, breathing being. You're just alive. It's a study of biology, a study of life, right? Okay. Zoe means that's the way life was meant to be lived, right? Living life to its fullest. And so what he's saying is, just some really neat words. It's hard to bring it out in English. What he's saying is the core of your being. If you're underneath it all, go back to Judas. He said some things out loud, but that's not where his heart was. It's not where his psyche was, right? If the core of your being is focused on yourself, guess what? You'll lose it all. If you give up the core of your being, if it's not about you, if it's all about him, then you're finally going to discover what life was meant to be. You're finally going to get the Zoe of life. Just some really interesting words there in verse 25. If anyone serves me, he must follow me. Who's he talking about when he talks about this, giving up your life to find life? He's talking about those who want to follow him. This is an answer. Who's he answering? Did I already lose that? These are the Greeks that come to Jesus, and Jesus' answer is, can I summarize it this way? Greeks want to see him, and Jesus says, I'm going to die, and I got to die to accomplish what God wants me to do. And anybody who's going to follow me, you have to die. What kind of message is that? Doesn't that sound like food's not for, it's for the children, it's not for you? It sounds a little harsh on the surface, but it's true. It's true, and he's talking about everybody, but this is part of his answer to the Greeks who come to him. If anyone serves me, he must follow me. And where I am, my servant will be also. If anyone serves me, the Father will honor him. It's another way of saying you've discovered life to the fullest. You're going to have a relationship with God as long as you give up trying to live for yourself. Yeah.
It sounds like he's trying to say, you don't know what you're in for. Almost.
Yes. Yeah. Jesus says that on many occasions. You have no idea what you're asking for. Make me think of when they're asking to sit on the right and left hand of him, and when he comes into his kingdom, he pretty much said, you have no idea what you're asking for, because it's not just a glorified position. There's hardship associated. Good, yes.
I think he's telling them, if they want to see him, he's telling them the way to see him.
Good.
Yeah.
Good. I think ultimately that's exactly right. That's exactly right. This is the way you have life. This is the way you see him. On the surface level, they want to just, it seems, though they just want to have a sit down and answer some questions. And Jesus is going a whole lot deeper. If you really want to see me. Good insight. I appreciate that, Mary. Verse 27. Now my soul has become troubled. My soul has become troubled. And what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? What hour is he talking about? He's looking forward to the cross, and he realizes that. And he says, by the way, why did the cross trouble Jesus? Why would it make him troubled?
Well, he's about to take on sin. God's sin, yeah. I can't imagine being separated from God for the first time ever.
Yeah. Because in the garden, when he prayed the prayer, how did he word that? He said, if it's possible, would you let what happen?
This cup pass.
Let this cup pass from me. What's the cup?
Wrath.
The wrath of God. Throughout the Old Testament, the cup represents the wrath of God. Remember when Jeremiah offers the cup to the neighboring nations? It was a picture of the judgment of God coming on. And Jesus is saying he knows when he goes to the cross, he's going to experience the wrath of God. And so he finishes that prayer by saying, what? Nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. Because he knows he has to face that. I really do think that's part of why his soul has become so troubled, because he knows what he's going to be taking on. He's not just dying a physical death. There's so much more to it than that. I don't think you can explain the death on the cross without taking on the spiritual dimension. Because how can one physical death substitute millions of physical deaths? That doesn't quite balance out, does it? The only way you can make this balance out is if you remember that he's no ordinary man. He's an eternal God man. He's able to suffer more than what any one person could suffer. And part of that Jesus is grappling with here troubles him. What shall I say? Father, save me from this. Doesn't this sound like a prayer in the garden?
Yeah.
You know, if there's any way for this to pass, he says, should I say that? But for this purpose, I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name. It's kind of like, nevertheless, not my will, your will be done. Saying pretty much the same thing. Then a voice came out of heaven. I have both glorified it and will glorify it again. I love this. How many times did God speak with an audible voice from heaven during Jesus' ministry? 3 times.
3 times.
What are those 3 times? Number 1.
Baptism.
Okay, at the baptism of Jesus. What did he say on that occasion? This is my beloved Son with whom I'm well pleased. Okay, what's the second time that God spoke? On the mountain. How many witnesses were there?
3 plus the 2.
Plus the 2.
Yeah.
Plus the prophet.
But the cloud came, and we don't know if the 2 have left already yet. But the cloud came. There are 3 people, living witnesses, that came down off the mountain with Jesus. Who were those 3 guys?
Peter, James, and John.
Who had just spoken up? Peter did. What did Peter say?
Let's build 3 tabernacles.
And God said, this is my beloved Son, with whom I'm well pleased. And what does he add this time? Listen to him. Listen to him. The emphasis is on Jesus. This is the 3rd occasion where God speaks from heaven. And what does he say here? I have both glorified it and will glorify it again. Okay, so the crowd of people who stood by and heard it were saying that it had thundered. Okay, I mean no disrespect like this, but this is why I think God has a very deep voice.
Yeah.
He chooses to use a voice. It sounds like thunder. Which, by the way, I'm one of those people. I just love the lightning strikes, as long as I'm not in the pack. I just love sitting out there. It's kind of like the double boom of the right, and all the time it's like, yeah, it's so impressive. Anyway, it sounded like thunder. Others were saying an angel has spoken to him. Okay, I don't think when they say it is thunder, it means that they just couldn't tell anything. And was that a voice or not? Because remember what they said in the explanations they gave in Acts, the 2nd chapter, when they were speaking languages that they'd never learned. Remember what some of the crowd said? Well, they're just drunk. Well, how does getting drunk make you speak 5 different languages? Sometimes people immediate explanations make no sense at all. God spoke, and some people thought it was the voice of an angel. Others were saying it's like thunder. Jesus answered in verse 30 and said, "This voice has not come for my sake, but for your sakes." That's another reason why I think it probably was understood. It wasn't just some rumbling or some noise.
Probably why John brings it up, because he wants everybody to believe. So, and he's the only one that gives this account. Right?
He's the only one that what?
Gives this account.
Yes, that's exactly right. He's the only one that gives this detail. You're exactly right. Now judgment is upon this world. Now the ruler of this world must be cast out. The ruler of this world must be cast out. What's he talking about here? He's talking about going to the cross, isn't he? The cross, multi-level. What's going on in heaven? Great battle in heaven. And this is part of the reason Satan gets cast out of heaven, because of what Jesus accomplishes on the cross. The ruler of this world will be cast out. And if I be lifted up from the earth, that's another clear reference to the cross, isn't it? Will draw all men to myself.
It's a reference to something else, too.
Yes. By the way, we'll finish on this. I'm out of time. When he says, draw all men to myself, does that mean everybody's going to be saved?
No.
No. How do you know not everybody's going to be saved? Because the same Jesus who said this said there's a broad path that leads to destruction and a narrow path that leads to life.
Well,
Many there are on the way to destruction, few there are in life.
and we know that he continues to polarize people.
Oh.
Even today, it hasn't
Exactly
stopped.
right. That's exactly right. When he says all men, though, it's the idea of indiscriminately. It doesn't make any difference if you're a Jew or Gentile, if you're rich or poor, male or female. It's open. Whosoever will. It's another way of saying whosoever. Doors are wide open for anybody. Let's pray. God, we thank you so much that doors are open for everybody. And everybody in the world needs to hear this message. God, I pray that they'll draw closer to you as a result of being around us, because we've spent our time in your word. Thank you for my brothers here tonight. Encourage them, work through them, let your light shine through them. We pray in Jesus' name. All right, which verse did we make it to?
Let's see, 33.
33.